Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of our humble little EduLeaders Speak podcast by EduEnhance. This is an initiative that comes from our heart. It's an opportunity to share the wonderful conversations we get to have with educational leaders in the region, with the rest of you, and put the spotlight in on important topics. Today's topic is one that's very close to my heart. It's been something that I've dedicated so much of my time and energy to over the past few years, professional development for teachers. And the title of the podcast, I'm going to say it in full because I love it, The Educator's Path, Navigating the Journey of Professional Learning. We have a very, very special guest here with us today. It takes you only 5 minutes with Colin to know that he brings a vast range of experience and expertise to schools, whether it's in terms of professional development or really anything else. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you personally, Colin, over the past couple of months, and we're so excited to share your wisdom with the world. How are you feeling today?
Great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Awesome. So I will try to condense your bio into maybe 60 seconds. I'll do my best, although it could take me half a day.
You're just saying that because I'm old, that's all. It's been a long career.
I didn't say anything yet. All right. So Colin's wonderful career began, should I say 1985? Let's say 1985.
Yeah, 84,
I did
85.
stalk you on LinkedIn a while ago, and then I was like, wow, mashallah. So Colin's career started in 1985, and Colin, you're a math teacher at heart, I believe. And then you transitioned into leadership, teacher professional development. You spent a number of years at different organizations. One of your most notable experiences that you told me about was your experience with National Strategies in the UK, which is a UK government organization. You were the director of a school improvement endeavor across the UK. And your focus was on teacher professional development. And then from there, a whole range of experiences after that brought you to the Middle East as well, working with the Bahrain Education Development Fund, working with the Bahrain government, working with a major Qatar government organization. And now finally you're here in the UAE as Director of Professional Learning at NCE Charter Schools. I know I did not do justice at all to your bio, but here we are. Now we'll just hear from you directly. So thank you once again for being on our podcast.
It's a pleasure.
I'm going to pass the mic over to Iram figuratively to take this forward.
Thank you, Bushra. Always a pleasure to be your co-host. And certainly today is a very special day because we met Colin a few months ago. Since we work with NCE Charter Schools, and it's been a brilliant experience. But when we were introduced to you, within the first 5 minutes, Colin, we knew that we've met a powerhouse of information and knowledge when it comes to professional development and education in general. So you actually inspired us to go down this route where we want to enhance our services in professional development and see how we can help our educators in the region gain from your knowledge and your experience and the services that we can provide. So today we'll begin with the question that we ask all our guests. Because we continue to be in awe of all that you all do as educators, as leaders. So the first question would be, Colin, what is your why? Why are you in the field of education, and why do you prefer leading professional development in your work?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And I think it was something that there was an inevitability about that I was going to end up in teaching. And then when I was actually training to be a teacher, it was one of those complete wow moments where my attitudes, my beliefs, everything about what I thought about education was changed. Since then, as you've mentioned, I've had a sort of a very rich and varied journey, which has been incredible. I feel I've had such a fortunate and wonderful career. So I've worked in 16 different countries.
Wow, amazing.
Not living in all of them, but spending a lot of time in all of those 16. Working, as you said, a teacher, advisor, a consultant, a government advisor. And I actually came to the UAE because my previous role with Education Development Trust, where I was lead advisor for teacher development, meant that I was spending time flying from place to place across the world. So visiting various countries, for example, in Africa or Brunei or in the Middle East. So there was a lot of flying around, going from one program to another program. And I was wanting really to spend a bit more time focused on one thing, actually seeing long-term impact that I was involved in. And it was a colleague I met while I was in Egypt, somebody I knew, who sort of persuaded me to come here. One of the reasons I was persuaded is because I think there's tremendous potential, and I think most of the potential here is still untapped. And particularly when I'm talking about the government schools, the local Emiratis, and there are a lot of challenges, and I like a challenge. What motivates me is making a difference. And teachers, I think teaching is the best job in the world, really.
Agreed.
But I think it's the hardest job in the world. And I think teachers deserve the very best support they can get.
Absolutely.
And that's what motivates me.
Wow, wonderful.
Yes. I will say that I'd always known teaching to be a complicated profession, but when I got into professional development and I realized the different layers of preparation and the amount of continuous learning that is required to help our youngest learners learn, it really dawned on me, as teachers they have a very intense and complex role, and they do deserve all the support and the encouragement and applause that they get.
Absolutely.
And our region is very unique, which you sort of hinted at a couple of minutes ago as well. There is a lot of diversity. There's also a massive push for change and transformation. There's a constant drive to adopt and embrace best practices, and also be at the forefront of everything. So how do you think the education landscape and government policies in our region influence or should influence the design and delivery of PD programs for teachers?
I think I'd probably start off by saying that through my career, I've discovered that there were a lot of similarities first. So wherever you are in the world, some of the drivers for professional development are the same. They might have a slightly different name to them. They might look slightly different, but they are the same. So that includes things like teacher standards and school leader standards. It includes things like school inspection, the curriculum and whatever curriculum is being used, and curriculum reform, the national education policies that are there, and the priorities for particular countries or states or whatever it is. More recently, things like developments in technology. So, I was in Sierra Leone before I came here for a period of time, and although Sierra Leone is a very, very, very different country, there were still questions about how can we use technology effectively and what can we do and how does it work there. And then there's individual school needs and individual teacher needs. So there's some common things. It doesn't matter where you are, I think. But there are some special drivers for the region and special drivers for here in particular. One of those is that we've got students who are coming here from many different countries, speaking many different languages, many different experiences that they're bringing here, which is something to build on and something to really value. But that can cause challenges for teachers. I think we've also got many different curricula. So you'll have teachers, for example, who they've just taught, say, an American curriculum, but suddenly they're expected to pick up bits of an MOE curriculum or bits of an English curriculum or whatever it happens to be. Also, when you have teachers coming from different countries, they've also had a very different teaching experience, potentially. Their own training, their own initiation to becoming a teacher has been very, very different. And put all of those teachers in one place, in one institution, how do you get consistency? How do you ensure that everybody's sort of pulling in the same direction? Everyone's got similar beliefs. There's other things such as the language of instruction. So there may be issues where teachers are being expected to teach in a language which isn't their first language, which again can cause all sorts of problems. But we've also got a very diverse education system here. So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of drivers. I think the other thing I'd probably say is that, in my mind, teaching is and should be a clinical practice profession. And that means it should be based on the research. So again, this is a commonality across countries. But what it means is that if I'm teaching, I need to keep up to date with the latest research in the same way that a doctor keeps up to date with the latest research. And one of the things we need to think about is how can we make that happen? As you said, teachers are really busy. It's hard. Lots of things that they need to do, but they still need to keep up to date. Does that?
It does, yeah. And what I'm hearing from you is that even though we all envision a similar end goal in terms of what we want the ideal to look like, we have very many different starting points in our region to sort of make that catch up happen. So that's something for everyone to think about, and think about how we're supporting our teachers in getting there and how we're valuing them as well, because are we valuing them on the same level as doctors?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes think about a region or a country as being homogenous and all the same. And actually, there's, as I said earlier, there's great diversity. So I go from one school here to another school, and it can be like I'm going from one country to another country. It can
Feel
be
that
very,
every day.
very different.
That's true. But having said that, and of course, diversity is something that we really value in the UAE, and we feel that with children as well, because we support educators with programs for children, and the big effort from our end is differentiation. So we feel that one-size-fits-all approach does not work for the children. So try and customize and personalize as much as possible for each child. And technology helps us do that. But when it comes to teacher, Colin, how do you personalize or differentiate your training for teachers with so many, different layers and varieties of students, of languages, of needs? It could be special ed, it could be so many needs in the classroom. So how can PD be also differentiated?
Okay, I think there's a few things that's probably worth picking up there. One is for me to explain what for me is professional development or professional growth.
That sounds like a good starting
because I
point.
think that sort of helps steer this. So training or workshops for me isn't professional development. What is professional development or professional growth is having a teacher where their knowledge grows. That's one aspect of it. So it's a growth in knowledge. A second bit that's there is a growth in their beliefs and a change in their attitudes sometimes. And then the third thing is actually a change in practice. So it's all of those three things together is what growth is. So when we're thinking about professional development, what I think we always need to think about is, similar to students, where are those teachers? So where are they in terms of their knowledge base? What is it that they know? What are the next things that they need to know? Then the question is, well, what is it that they believe? Because teachers' beliefs really do affect very strongly what they do in the classroom. And they also affect very strongly what happens to how they respond to professional development.
Correct.
And then the third thing is really, how do we support them to change their practice? Because we know that, for example, running training might give them the knowledge, but what it doesn't do is support teachers to change their practice for a multitude of reasons. So for me, it's about understanding the context. And that's the context of the teacher, the context of the school, the context of the community, wherever that happens to be. It's understanding what the teacher's needs are, but also at the same time what the school's needs are and what the community's needs are in terms of where things need to go.
Understanding the context in which they're teaching in.
Absolutely. And it's also a case of then beginning to get a sense of what is a natural progression for them. So there was a paper that was written 2002, a sort of seminal work on professional growth, and it looked at the four aspects of things that made professional growth. One of them was an external stimulus. Another thing was actually what is the teacher's knowledge, beliefs, attitudes. The third thing then was what was their practice. And the fourth thing is what is the student outcomes. And it's the interactions between all of those that are important. And I know this sounds really complicated, and sometimes it can be, but it's a case of thinking of all of those when we're beginning to plan and prepare professional development. What are those things going to look like? How can we support all of those? And how can we support the interaction between them?
Excellent. Those are very, very valid points.
Yes, I just love how we're already in the nitty gritty of practice, how to evolve practice as opposed to just talking about professional development in general. I can recall the hours you spent with Colin talking about how we can support, with NCE Charter Schools with our work with you, and learning so much about what could go into the process and refining our own thinking around that. So actually, this is going a little bit off the script, if you like to say that, but going a little bit off script. But what does it take to evolve practice then, Colin? Okay, beliefs, practice, all those layers. What does it take?
Okay, there's actually quite a lot of research that's been done in terms of what is effective professional growth, or what stimulates effective professional growth. And there are a number of components that I think are really important. And it's also some of the things we can begin to look at when we're saying how successful has any professional development been. One of the things that we need to do, and this sounds a bit strange, is almost get teachers to acknowledge where they are, to acknowledge where their beliefs are, to acknowledge what their knowledge is, and then to challenge that. So there's a guy who is in the UK who sadly now dead, but called Malcolm Swan from Nottingham University. And he wrote a lot about causing cognitive conflict and the importance of cognitive conflict in teacher development. Because it's that notion that what happens is suddenly you're presented with something that you haven't thought about, you haven't experienced, it's different to what you think. And it causes this sort of dissonance, this shock in you.
That's cognitive conflict.
And that's the cognitive conflict. Okay. Because you're thinking, but that's not what I do. That's not what I think. Let me give you an example of that from, if you like, my experience from a few years ago, working with a group of teachers in Egypt, in one of my schools in Egypt. And I'd shown them a video of somebody teaching. And this person had actually been teaching in the UK. And we talked a little bit about the video as a school group. I went into the school about a week later, and one of these teachers came running up to me and said, Mr. Colin, I've changed how I'm teaching.
Wow.
And I was like, sorry, what do you mean you've changed how you're teaching? She said, I was just thinking, in that video, that teacher never said no. And the teacher never said yes either. The teacher always asked the child to say a little bit more or asked another child to comment. So I've started doing that now. So that was an example of some cognitive conflict that teacher had experienced.
So cognitive conflict is a good thing.
Cognitive conflict, I think, is a good thing.
Okay.
As long as what you then do is resolve it and address it.
All right. I see.
So I think that's one of the key things. One of the things that for me is most important is getting teachers thinking. And this isn't always easy because of the pressures that people are under and because many teachers are used to being told not to think almost. This is how you do it.
That's a very sad truth.
But actually, reflection is at the heart of teaching. It's beginning to look at your practice, think about your practice, analyse your practice, and think about, well, what can I do to improve my practice? And that, again, is another important part of professional development. I think the other thing I'd say is when I was working, now at New Century Education, I talk about there being 3 cogs in our engine of professional development. The first cog is providing teachers with the knowledge and the information that they need to know, and that includes creating cognitive conflict. Giving them that sort of knowing about something. So that's one of the cogs. The second cog is to support teachers to put things into practice. Okay? Because if you just tell them something or give them information, that doesn't translate into the classroom. So it's how do we support teachers then to embed what they've learned in their teaching. And again, I can think of various examples where I've seen that happen recently. And the third part about this is getting teachers to work together and talk about the various things that's actually happening, the things they're seeing, how they're analysing their practice. And that reflection is the key bit. But put all of those three things together, that's when you're going to get professional growth. Coaching by itself, or talking with colleagues, just that, or workshops or self-study or reading, together they're not going to really give strong professional growth. Put them all together and you've got a much better chance of that happening.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why when we were thinking of the title of the podcast, we just wanted to really emphasize a journey of professional development, because oftentimes we think about it in terms of a touch point or two, like a workshop or a training or a skill, but we forget that teachers, if we plan learning journeys for our students, then we need to plan them for teachers as well as people who are going to deliver that learning journey and need to involve themselves to keep up with best practices.
I'm a very strong believer in the concept of lifelong learning, but lifelong learning doesn't mean it happens at different points. It's continuous learning. So it's something that happens. And as a teacher, you're learning continuously. So, even me here now, I'm reflecting as I'm talking on some of the things I'm thinking and saying, do I really mean that? Is that the best thing to say? What could I say? And that's what good teachers do. So they're continually learning, continually developing, and that's really important.
But I think that's also such a major twist on traditional professional development, which I perceive to be more of like a content, like this is a topic, I'm going to tell you what the skill is, maybe I'll show you what the skill is, and this is the best practice, this is what we do. But here you're sort of, it's more self-driven. You're trying to get the teacher she or he needs to be very engaged in the process, reflecting
Absolutely.
on their own practice, and kind of doing the work themselves in figuring out how to practice it, how to try it out, and then just being very proactive in the process as opposed to just being a passive recipient.
I'm actually just spellbound by all the great information that I'm hearing from Colin, from Bushra, because you're both specialists in professional development. But I also know as a teacher, and you know what they say, once a teacher, always a teacher.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I do remember in my training, my professor said something very, very important, and it was like a light bulb moment for me, because he said that it is so important and critical to unlearn sometimes as well, and not just learn in the classroom. So as a teacher, that aspect of self-awareness and being cognizant of the fact that you don't know everything. Okay, you may have researched or studied or gotten that certification or that degree, but you always have to have an open mind. You always have to be constantly self-evaluating and learning. Only then you'd be able to be, in fact, a model for your students as well, that it's okay. You're not supposed to know everything, but keep an open mind. Learn.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think is wonderful about the classroom is I never know what's going to happen. So if I'm in a classroom and I'm teaching, I'm never sure what a student's going to say as an answer to a question.
I love the
I'm
feeling.
never going to be sure about how they're going to respond to something.
Right.
And effective and really excellent teachers live in that, and they build on it and they thrive on that. But it is really hard. But that's where you're learning, and that's where you're thinking. I often say that teaching would be a lot easier if in a classroom situation, a student says something that you weren't expecting. And what you do is you can just say, oh, I wasn't aware of that. You press the pause button. Everything freezes. And you suddenly think, well, why did they say that? I don't know. Is it because of this or is it because of that? What's the best way of responding to that? Well, I could do this. I could ask them that. Okay, I'm going to do this. You press play and continue. Okay? But actually, real teachers do that. Real effective teachers do that in the moment.
I have a question here. This bothers me. It's something I think about a lot, genuinely, in professional development. So if I, as a as a student, never experienced this type of teaching. Is it fair to expect that I would be able to become that type of teacher?
That's a really good question. I don't think, if you like, teachers are born. I don't think teachers are somebody who's there and that's the moment and you're a teacher. So a few years ago, I got asked to talk or to speak to some undergraduate students about how I learned to teach. And I can still remember I started off by saying, I haven't learned to teach yet. It's been, whatever it was, 30 years, but I'm still learning. And that's what it's about. And I know that I teach teachers now differently to the way I started teaching them back in 1989 or when I first started doing teacher professional development, because I've learned. And I know that next year I'll be doing something different to what I'm doing now, because there'll be things that have just happened. And I honestly think if all teachers have got an open mind and if all teachers are supported to reflect, then yes, they can become like that. It just takes time, but that's what we've got and that's all we've got.
Agreed. And at the end of the day, it is a skill, right?
Yes.
So being a good teacher, of course, the fundamentals have to be there, where you have to be kind, you have to be patient, you have to have that passion for teaching or enriching children's lives. But then those strategies, the content knowledge, all those, they are skills.
Yes.
And they can be acquired, but that will has to be there. And as you said, that openness to learn and understand that there are things that world is evolving every day, right? There are new things coming out. So for example, technology, going back to our favorite subject. So, with technology is interesting that you still have a lot of pushback sometimes when you go in front of the teachers or even sometimes in a leadership meeting. You talk about technology, now you talk about AI, right? So everybody, now there is a school of thought that AI is going to take over the world. What are you guys doing? Kids are going to be too dependent on chat GPTs and so on. But the fact is that AI is here and this horse has bolted. It's there. So we can't now sit back and say, oh no, I don't want to know what ChatGPT or whatever AI is doing because I want to do it myself. The thing is that we have to learn, number one, our teachers, us, our generation, we have to understand that we have to keep an open mind towards this new technology and also use it in a way that it helps us, empowers us, and it doesn't really take away from what we are trying to do, but enhances it and makes it even better. So my question was about AI, that Colin, in terms of professional development and all the different components that you've been discussing, and that's brilliant, I mean, that approach. But how can technology or AI further support these different elements in this journey of professional development?
Okay, before I answer that, can I answer it in relation to the teaching and generally?
Please, absolutely.
I think one of the issues we sometimes have is what we think is we've got the technology that's there and all we've got to do is to train teachers with the technology or give them the technology. Now, what we know, for example, about things like teachers learning to act in the moment, it sounds really daft, but it's the basic knowledge as a teacher you need to have first. So in other words, you need to have your subject matter knowledge. You need to know the subject you're teaching.
Agreed.
You need to know what the research says and what the evidence is on best practice in teaching generically. And you need to know if you like, the best practice in what was referred to as pedagogical content knowledge, how to teach the specific bits of your subject, what are common misconceptions, what are best examples, all of those things. Unless you've got that knowledge, then it's very difficult for you to act in the moment. So you've got to get that basics that's there. I think it's exactly the same with technology. So I'm a very, very strong advocate of technology in teaching and a very, very, very strong advocate of technology in teacher professional development. But I have a worry that what we're doing at the moment is not using technology effectively. We're not thinking about when it's best to use it and how it's best to use it. It's a case of we use technology. Let me give you an example from teaching, and I'll say it in terms of professional development. I worked for a government agency in the UK responsible for technology in schools and colleges. And this was in up to about 2006 to 2010. And I would go into schools in the UK and I would come back depressed at times because I'd see technology being used, but actually the pedagogy and the teaching practice was worse than it had been before the technology was there.
Interesting.
Okay. So, a simple example is we have all of these things called, which came out, interactive whiteboards.
Correct.
But in the end, what it meant was teachers just began to use them almost as a form of lecturing. It just meant their lecturing had better pictures. It meant that the text was better. What it didn't do was use the evidence on how do we engage students more, how do we get them involved. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yes, totally.
And I think it's exactly the same with technology in professional development. It's got so much potential, but let's think about how we use it. When we think of professional development, this is another added layer to the complexity. There are lots of interactions which need to happen for professional development to be successful. One is the interaction between the teacher and the facilitator. That's one of the things that's important, or the external stimulus, whoever happens to be there. Another interaction which is important is between the teacher and colleagues, their peers, the other people that are there and part of it. The third interaction, which is we often forget about, is the cognitive interaction, where the teacher is actually interacting with the ideas and the themes and the topics that they're learning about. Because you can take something in and just not interact with it. It's just like passes through your ear and out the other one. So those three things are really important. So with
Sorry, can you jump in? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that interaction, that cognitive interaction? Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Okay, I can remember somebody years ago defining what lecturing was. And they said lecturing is the passing of the notes of the lecturer from the page of the lecturer's notes, to the notes of the student without passing through the mind of either of them.
Wow, that's powerful.
Okay.
That's true as well.
Yeah. So that's a case of there's no cognitive interaction. Okay.
Just passing information.
Yeah.
Yes.
So cognitive interaction is where you're sitting thinking, where you're challenged to think, well, why is that the case? Or what about that? Or do I agree with that? Or do I not agree with that? It's where you're thinking hard. And thinking hard is really, really important. And does that answer your question?
It does. It actually takes me way back when I was doing work study in college and teaching science at these elementary schools, and it was very hands-on, activity-based teaching and learning. And it was my first time implementing a class as such. And sitting through an activity with the students, it forced me to really deeply think about the topic, and it was a very scary feeling, a genuinely scary feeling, because suddenly I felt like there was this vacuum in my mind. I had been saying something, but I hadn't been literally feeling it. And I had to sit down and think about it and talk to my second graders and third graders about it as well. So you put that in context for me, actually, with what you just explained. Thank you so much.
And again, I've seen people who've come out of professional development sessions where they haven't been thinking, and that's not going to have any impact at all. So going back to your question with technology, for me at least, what I try to think about is how do I use technology, or when is it appropriate to use technology in terms of that first bit of the interaction between, say, for example, teacher and facilitator. When is it most effective to use that? Because there are times when it's going to be most effective. That might be, for example, because we're at a great distance and because I can have a conversation or a discussion without having to waste 5 hours going somewhere, having a half hour and then 5 hours driving back. So sometimes there can be times where that connection, that interaction, it's possible through technology. If we look at the second bit, which is the social interaction, again, we can think of when is it important to have the interaction between the colleagues and the peers, and how can the technology support us? Somebody made a comment, I heard a comment the other day, where someone was talking about, for example, professional development that had occurred on Zoom. And the comment was made that I'm not sure anybody was there even. So somebody was sort of presenting, cameras were off, mics were off.
You've been there.
You ask a question.
Yes, I'm having PTSD right now.
Yeah. But the key thing is, again, similar to students, teachers learn when they're talking to each other. So when I'm running professional development, I always try to get either pairs, groups, the whole group talking to each other, sharing their experiences. Okay? Now, the question is, when is it useful to use technology for that? And again, there are loads of opportunities. I could probably talk for hours about different examples.
But please do share a couple with us.
Yeah.
Okay, let's imagine what I want to do is, let's use the distance example. So going back to 2020, 2021, I was having to run some professional development for some people in Jordan. But because of COVID and restrictions and things like that, I couldn't get there, okay? I could use technology to run that professional development, and I could still get them engaged. So I could present things with them. I could have online polls where I wanted them to do things. I could set them off into groups using the technology where they could talk in groups, and then the group had to present back or whatever it was. So that was, at that time, it was an appropriate use of doing it, and that's just a very basic thing.
So what it sounds like is you were able to set certain expectations, you were able to use certain tools to facilitate interaction, and that's what made that online session effective.
Yeah. Now, there's a part of me thinks that in many cases, most adults, or most older adults, seem to find face-to-face interaction easier than online interaction. I don't think that's true with younger students and younger people.
Honestly, sometimes at this point, even I sort of dread doing trainings online. It's just not the same. Once you've experienced that in-person and exchange of energy and ideas and then interaction, I think it's still the second best option for me to do it online, if I may say so.
Yeah.
For us, certainly. But as you said, Colin, for children who are born into technology, right? So they say that do not confine your children to your own learning, for they were born in another time. So absolutely. For us, yes. Yeah. Hands down, in person, face to face. But for the kids, it could be a different story. But please go ahead.
And then the third thing is just the cognitive interaction. It's what can I do with the technology that's actually going to get people thinking.
Exactly.
And there are things that we can do to get people thinking, where there's can be a stimulus that's there. There can be something that people can respond to. And you can use that, for example, it's not the case that technology means online and lack of technology means face-to-face.
Thanks for highlighting
it's
that. Yes.
all blended. So, for example, video for me is really, really important. It's probably one of the most important tools in my teacher professional development arsenal. One of the things that's really key is for teachers to see practice to start off with. So if I can talk about practice, I can describe practice, I can say what the research says, I can get them to talk about practice, but unless they see somebody using that practice, there's always going to be a gap.
Correct.
So video can be really helpful for getting people to see practice. Video can also be really helpful for getting people to reflect on their practice, their own practice. So things that are really powerful, there's a platform called Iris Connect, which we've just brought into NCE. We're beginning to establish that now, which means that what teachers can do is their lesson can be videoed, or parts of their lesson can be videoed. What that enables them to do is what I was saying before, they can watch their lesson and they can do the things they couldn't do in the moment. Pause, rewind, think about, so all of that power is suddenly there. And actually, when you watch a video, there's things you notice in the video that you might not have noticed when you're teaching. True. So again, that's another very powerful aspect of the technology. Suddenly, I hadn't realized that that person was doing such and such, or I hadn't realized that the example they gave was as good as it was. I should have picked that up and done something more with it. So that's very, very powerful. But also then you can use the video, and I use it a lot, and I've started using it at NCE, even though I've only been there 6 months, where teachers will look at a video and then they will then reflect on it. They will say, well, what did you notice? What did you see? What was different? What did you expect? And that's really powerful, and that can really create that cognitive interaction I was talking about.
Absolutely. And to your point earlier, where it's all about self-reflection as well. So if teachers know that they're being recorded, not for any other purpose, but for them to just improve on their skills, to learn more, to learn from themselves, really, I think there's no harm in that. And teachers can actually benefit from it a lot if they just keep an open mind to it.
And you've picked up the really important thing. Professional development is about trust. It's about rapport between whoever is leading the professional development and the person who's receiving the professional development. Although I always tend to think, even though I'm leading professional development, I'm still learning from it. But there is that issue of trust being really important. So trust-based lesson observations, trust where a teacher can feel they can do what they think is right, and no one's going to then criticize them
or judge them or penalize
afterwards.
them. Exactly.
And that is really important. And so again, when you're coming to things like coaching, and you can use the video for coaching. So with Iris Connect, you've got a video. I can actually, if I've got a coach, I can then go and make a comment where I can say, this was an interesting bit of the lesson. This is me as a teacher. And I make a little note on it, and I flag it, and I say to the coach, what do you think about this? This is my thought. I, as a coach, can go in. I can go straight to that bit they flagged. I can see their comment. I can watch it, and then I can give my comment back. And again, something which hopefully, like any good professional development, is going to get them thinking. So it's not me making a judgment and saying, I think you should have done this. Most of the time, it's me trying to ask a question to get them to think a little bit more.
Excellent.
I'm so glad you brought this up. It just so happens that ever since you told us about Iris Connect, there's so many teacher professional development platforms out there. I dare say there are even other video-enabled platforms. But what really awed me personally was just seeing that is, first of all, educators creating this platform. You can feel the difference. The teacher records a reflection, and she alone has the power to share it with whoever she sees fit, and nobody else can copy it or do anything else with it. So putting the power, again, in the hands of the teacher, where she's very intentionally recording herself and sharing that forward. And then just even in the naming of everything on the platform, like a video recording is a reflection, which is exactly how you would describe, the process of reflecting on your practice. And then, so this type of approach that the platform takes has really, gotten us very excited, and we're thinking so deeply about how to bring it to all the different contexts, different types of schools we work with in the region. But bringing video to the classroom, I mean, even the first time I heard the idea, I was feeling a bit apprehensive about it. Like, I got the thought of, first of all, like, is it a surveillance technology? And do I have to get everything perfectly right? And there's going to be a record of what I did. So what would you say to an educator or school leader who was feeling apprehensive about bringing a camera to the classroom?
Okay, the first thing I'd say is it's important before any camera appears in the classroom to get the protocols, the procedures, the principles all agreed. So I've had situations where, for example, I did some work on using video clubs. We didn't have Iris Connect. We were just using mobile phones with some Syrian refugee teachers in refugee camps in Lebanon, which they were very happy to get involved. They weren't sure to start off with, but after a little while, they were really into this. But we agreed, for example, like the video was theirs. If after the video was done, if they didn't want it, they didn't want to show it, they didn't want to talk about it, that was their decision. If it was agreed that we were going to use the video with a group of teachers, where that teacher would talk about why they've chosen that 6-minute clip and what it was, that at the end of that, if they wanted to delete that video, they could delete that video. Agreed that, for example, that video wouldn't be shown outside with anybody else, that it wasn't going to be used as any form of record for anything, that if they didn't want the principal to see it, the principal wouldn't see it, and the principal would agree with that. All of those sort of protocols, establishing those first is really important. What I've often done myself, and what I've often recommended, is that, you know, if I was back in the classroom now, I'd be the first person who'd be videoed. So I'm actually going to model it. I'm going to actually show that this is okay. So people can look at me first. And I did that recently at NCE. I was training our middle leaders on coaching. And so what I did was I had a video of me coaching another teacher. I hate videos of me. But it was important that I did that so they could begin to see that, you know, I'm happy to do this. Because it's a learning experience.
Example.
Yeah. So it's establishing all of those things. It's making sure that the principal and everybody else in the school also agrees with all of those protocols that's there. That's really important. Personally, I try to have some very clear rules about how we use the video. So if we're using it for coaching, you know, as I say, again, it's what's the session? Does it stay on the teacher's phone if it's on the phone, or if it's the platform, they've got the right to do whatever they want with it. If I'm using it for a video club session, again, what's the processes? How is it going to be used? Getting all of that agreed.
I'm just curious to know, so the teachers who you've shown the platform to, are they also curious about the anonymized feature? So Iris has an anonymized feature, or they're open, or they're feeling open to being recorded as is?
Because we haven't started using it yet, and we're just beginning to set it up, the sort of questions we're getting are the ones like, well, where's the video being stored? And what's happening with the video, and whose video is it? But I think it's a bit distant for them at the moment to really sort of have those anxieties.
I think that was such a good way to put it, that if the trust is there, because if there's trust deficit, then no matter what the leadership brings in, the teachers would feel a bit cautious or a bit, reserved about using that technology. But if the trust is there, that this, whatever strategy we are bringing in, whatever tool, technology is going to make your life easier, is going to encourage you to improve your skills and growth, I think the teachers would welcome it. So it's just, as you said, setting very clear protocols, having clarity on the objectives, why are we doing this? And then that trust is there.
And I think people could be worried, understandably. Let's imagine you're having a lesson videoed, or you're videoing a lesson, your choice, and there's some students who are particularly badly behaved. You might get really worried about that. So again, what I tend always to do is to say to the teachers, you choose the class. You choose when it is. I'm not going to say this is the lesson or this is the group.
So give ownership to the teacher.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And again, what I often do is to start off with is I get the teachers to choose something themselves that they're proud of almost, something they're positive about. And then over time, they begin to take more risks.
That's what I love about this whole initiative and this whole, it's the approach. It's about establishing a culture of learning, of feedback, of support, collaboration. And seeing professional development as a journey as opposed to just some boxes you need to check off, really. So
can I say one caveat though? And it's a case of this all sounds easy and as if this is all going to work. There are some teachers who, because of trust issues or maybe because of other issues, coaching is not going to be the right thing for them. Being videoed and getting them to reflect, they're not there yet. So it's a case of there might be steps that need to be worked on together to build the trust, or dare I say, to move them forward so you get to that trust point before you can then begin to give that sort of autonomy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The journey then.
Yeah.
The journey.
Yeah.
This is great because we've just a couple of minutes left, and I do think it's worthwhile to touch upon coaching a little bit. I do think coaching is one of those things that is relatively new to the region, and a lot of schools are thinking about how to establish that system of active feedback and improvement. So what is effective coaching to you?
Okay. Let me say, first of all, that the key thing about coaching, again, is the relationship. That's the first thing. Second, the coaching that we're beginning to establish in NCE has got different aspects to it. So we've been talking about some of the coaching is sometimes the coach might teach a lesson or might team teach, observed by the teacher, and then there's a conversation. So the discussion and the conversation is actually on the coach teaching or the coach team teaching with the teacher.
Before it's about looking at the teacher's practice or evaluating
Or,
that.
well, it can move between those things. So, for example, let's imagine that I've got a long coaching relationship with somebody. Even though that teacher might be very used to the fact of me observing them, there might be times where they're just not sure what this looks like in practice. We're focused on, for example, how you respond to students' answers. And they just don't quite get, how can I get dialogue going? How can I not say yes or no? And therefore, even though we might have a long relationship, they're happy to be observed, they say, can you just show me what that looks like? So I might still then show them what that looks like and demonstrate it. The other part, obviously, is the more familiar part of the teacher teaching and the coach observing. But one of the things then is it's the sort of discussion and it's everything else that happens. So coaching is about the relationship. I mentioned before it's about the rapport. It's about the trust. It's about having a conversation. I said to a group of teachers just yesterday, we were talking about coaching, and I said, this is going to be a coaching conversation after a lesson observation. It might be half an hour, it might be an hour. And they were like, what? I said, we've often just had an email that said, here's what we thought. My comment is teachers deserve the full opportunity to think and reflect and be supported. If they've had me or me and somebody else sat in their lesson for an hour, and even teachers who are brilliant and feeling relaxed, they're still going to be more stressed when I'm sitting there. So therefore, they deserve the time from me. And it is a coaching conversation. So what I try to do is I get them to reflect. So tell me, what do you think was particularly significant in that lesson? What did you notice? Why do you think that was a particular strong moment? What were the things that was there? What do you think was something that you were less happy with? Why were you less happy with that? And have a dialogue and a discussion. We use at NCE a rubric, a teaching and learning rubric, to help steer the conversation. So they can begin to say, well, I think this is what I was doing, this is where it was. But we'll also try to do is developing a model of coaching which helps them from this say, where do I need to go next? What's the next thing I'm going to do? And what I always say is, let's try and focus just on one thing. Because if I just have a conversation with you and I say, well, you need to work on this, you need to work on this, you need to work on that. First of all, you're going to get stressed by that conversation and you're going to think there's so much that I need to do. You're going to have cognitive overload. You're not going to remember half of what I'm saying, and then you're not going to be sure which is the key thing to pick up on. If we have a conversation and we talk about it, and through the conversation you say, I really think I want to focus on this, and we talk about what's the actual detailed specific action you can do, then that's going to help. It's
not just about feedback.
Oh, it's not feedback.
It's not feedback, yeah.
It's questioning, it's dialogue, it's discussion. It's getting the teacher to think. What we know, again, is that if I just give somebody some information, that's likely to have less impact on their practice than if they come up with that information for themselves. Okay? So it's getting them to think. That's at the heart of what this is. And let me give you an example. Again, there was a teacher relatively recently who, in her classroom, I observed a lesson, I've used this experience a lot recently, there was a lot of chorusing going on. So chorusing is where the teacher asks a question, it's undirected, and children just yell out answers. And it's not very effective. You can't hear what's actually happening. So we had the conversation, and during that, she identified that's what she wanted to sort of try and change. She wanted to move away from chorusing. So we talked about what sort of things she could do instead. So she then went back to her classroom. I then went back for a follow-up observation, and you know what? There was zero chorusing.
Wow, amazing.
And it wasn't because I was there. The students clearly had got used to the new approach. They weren't shouting out. They were putting their hands up. They were waiting to be asked.
Yeah, this makes me think back to something I personally believe, when we try to categorize teachers as good teachers and bad teachers, just like good person and bad person or anything like that. Like, that is so misleading.
Completely.
It's all about skill. I could be a good teacher, quote unquote, but I could be strong in some aspects and need a bit of support and development in other aspects. And yeah, wow. I wish every school group had a head of teaching and learning like Colin.
Absolutely.
And it comes from the heart.
Honestly, so we are doing our research nowadays, trying to understand how we can support educators better in terms of professional development as well. So I was listening to something where, a TED Talk actually, and in that the question was that, what makes a good teacher a great teacher? I'm happy to say, Colin, that whatever you have shared with us, it pretty much aligns with all of that. So it said that, number one, celebrate mistakes. A great teacher
Absolutely.
will celebrate mistakes and not reprimand or put the student down if she sees a mistake. Secondly, appreciate differences. So we all talk about diversity and how there are differences. So address that and celebrate that. Then relay feedback. Give feedback always, and not criticism. That's not feedback, but positive feedback. And then address whatever you've observed. And then constantly evaluate themselves. So 4 things, which is all about self-reflection and what we were talking about earlier. So what I'm hearing now is that under Colin's leadership, I'm pretty sure that your teachers are on their path to becoming great teachers.
I hope so. And I believe they can do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. On that
Perfect.
note, thank you, Colin. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a lovely conversation, a wonderful way to end a Friday. And this was our learning experience as well. This was an active
every time it's an inspiration to sit with you, to learn from you. So thank you so much for inspiring us and for educating us so much on this topic and so much more. But before we close, I would like to take a couple of minutes of your time to ask you about your memorable moment. And you could just condense it in a couple of minutes, if you may, to both Colin and Bushra. You've both been, in that space of professional development, training teachers. So one memorable moment for both of you.
I mentioned one memorable moment earlier, which was the teacher who came running up to me saying, I've changed how I teach. That's something that will live with me forever. And maybe I go back to something I said at the beginning about how I became a teacher, or my own personal journey, and linking back to cognitive conflict. I can remember, I think it was the second session in my postgrad when I was training to be a teacher. And my tutor had put something up and was getting us to talk, something basic. This was an addition question. And he just put a very simple 2-digit, or it might have been 3-digit, 2-digit addition question on the board. Subtraction question. And asked us to sort of explain how we did it. And we were all maths teachers, or prospective maths teachers. And I can remember I was picked on to do the explanation. And as I started to explain what I was doing, he just started picking holes in everything I said.
Wow.
And it was a case of, during the course of this, he asked each question was completely 100% valid. And during the course of that 5 minutes, I experienced complete cognitive conflict in a way that I thought, I just don't know why I do this. I don't know what it means. How can I be a maths teacher if I don't know what's happening here?
Wow.
And that almost changed everything else for me from then onwards.
Amazing.
Wow. It's not fair that I get to go after Colin. I can't match up to something so profound. But I actually give an example that I think relates to what I've learned from Colin. So I know we've spent hours with Colin thinking about how to improve our teacher professional development offerings at NCE, and you were a big proponent for demonstrating, modeling, then practicing, and letting people collaborate in groups. And just a couple of weeks ago, I did that again. I started tossing away presentations and just sort of pulling out the materials, projecting them, and being like, let's talk. And just a couple of days ago, I was with a group of middle school teachers, and we're implementing our intervention program, Phonics for Reading, over there. It was at a different school setting. And I'd received like a frantic call from the head of intervention there saying that, the teachers are just not getting it. They're just not getting it. And so the task for me was to make it seem relatable or doable for middle school English teachers having to do phonics intervention for older students. And so I was there. I just pulled out the books. I said, we're going to look at the books. I'm going to project the routine over here. I ran through it once, and then I just said, it's time for you to run through it, and then do the whole feedback in groups. And then after that, the look in the teacher's eyes, where I was like, did you get it now? They're like, yeah, now we get it. And I was like, it was a matter of maybe 5 or 7 minutes of this time where, we just sort of did it together, and we talked about what the approach should be. And honestly, Colin, I don't think I would have gotten there without our conversation. So thank you so much, Ken, for that.
Thank you, Colin.
Well, no, thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's been a great session. We are absolutely thrilled and honored, and we would like to have you on our show again, Colin, because there's so much more we want to learn from you. So thank you once again. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bushra.
Thank you, Aram. All right. Until next time, then.